What would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions about striking out on your own, starting your own business, becoming an entrepreneur, and trying to grow your own business?
Popular memes often humorously depict the difference between what I do and what other people think I do. This is particularly true for entrepreneurs. Many times, friends and family don't truly understand our work, often believing the grass is greener on our side. Entrepreneurs frequently hear how others desire the supposed ease and freedom of owning a business. Yet anyone who has ventured into entrepreneurship knows that being your own boss is a myth.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Altium OnTrack Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Peterson. Today, we're talking with Mike Conrad, CEO and founder of Aqueous Technologies and host of the Reliability Matters podcast. Hopefully, you've seen Mike on the Reliability Matters podcast, and today we're going to be talking with him about a new book he will have coming out soon. I'm very excited to talk about this, and it's great to have you here today, Mike.
It's good to see you again, Zach. It's the roles have reversed. You were on my show, and now I'm on yours. So I'm not as used to being in this seat compared to your seat.
So if you could, for folks who are not familiar with you and what you do, just give us a brief background of yourself and of Aqueous Technologies.
Sure. I entered into the electronic assembly industry in 1985 through a very random set of events, and worked at a startup, an equipment manufacturing startup, and got disgruntled. I had an idea for a new product that I really wanted them to pursue, and they weren't real interested. And at some point, I just, picked up my baseball glove and bat and walked away, and decided that if I really wanted to see this product see the light of day, I just kind of need to do it myself, right? So I left that company and started my company in order to build that product, and that was 32 years ago. I don't know how that's possible because I'm only 32 years old. But anyway, 32 years ago, I must have started the business at age 0. So it's been quite a journey. And we manufacture cleaning equipment, post-reflow cleaning equipment for circuit assemblies. We remove contamination to improve reliability, in a nutshell.
Yeah. So instead of someone coming by with a bottle of, let's say isopropyl alcohol or one of the spray cans. Ooh. They can put it through an automated system, increase the throughput, increase the accuracy, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Over my career, I've walked through a lot of factory floors, as I'm sure you have, and I see that dreaded IPA squeeze bottle or pumper, and I just cringe. It's definitely cringeworthy to see that, but quite common. They're still out there, and people still use them. But yeah, I think our industry has progressed since the invention of IPA, or the discovery that IPA can clean some contaminants.
Yeah, and I will admit I have one of those squeeze bottles of IPA for cleaning up boards, but that's for a small lab, certainly not for a production operation for PCB assembly.
It's everyone's dirty little secret. We all have that, it's like the messy closet, at home. We all have a little IPA stashed on the side because it is a quick and easy solution. Solution's a big word. I wouldn't quite give it the title solution, but it's a small remedy for a little bit of quick cleanup.
Sure. And then you're also host of the Reliability Matters podcast, and I'm always interested to know, why did you start a podcast in the electronics industry? Because I say that because it's not necessarily the highest viewership niche for podcasts, right? I mean, I feel like finance is one of the more popular ones. And then when you get to like true crime, the numbers go off the charts. So people that do electronics podcasts, I always wonder, what caused you to get into this?
Yeah. Well, neither of us are giving Joe Rogan a run for the money, right?
Right.
I don't think the word viral and electronic assembly podcast go in the same sentence. As a company, we've done, kind of leading edge things, at least at the time. We were doing webinars 15 years ago, and I don't even think they were called webinars then. And GoToMeeting was the only platform, and oh my, those were tough. We've been doing those for a long time. Our company switched from a traditional sales approach, and what I mean by traditional is exhibiting at trade shows, running ads to say how great we are and how everyone else isn't, and very braggadocious things like that. And we decided to switch to an education model. So we, instead of exhibiting at every show possible all around the world every year and running all these braggadocious, obnoxious, frankly, ads, we decided to start producing technical workshops, non-commercial, and talking at, presenting at symposiums and conferences, writing papers, and conducting DOEs with industry partners. And at some point, we hit the webinar circuit, and then at some point I thought, this podcast thing seems interesting. Maybe I'll do a podcast on the subject of reliability, and I'll commit to 10. 10 sounds like a good number. If I can do 10, success, right? So that was about 155 episodes ago. It just keeps going. My first thought was, I don't know if I really like the podcast platform, but I want to try it because we were always trying new things. And then I also thought, well, I don't know if we can have more than 10 hours of discussion on reliability of circuit assemblies. I don't think there's any, I'm not even sure there's 10 hours worth of discussion. I was a little wrong on that. And one of the motivations to start the podcast was to create this knowledge vault. There are, we have an industry full of subject matter experts. You're one of them. And at some point, you're going to retire. Many of the SMEs have already retired or are in the process of retiring. I think of Doug Pauls and Dave Hillman, both from Collins. And, they leave and they take a lot of information with them. And much of our industry is unfortunately still tribal. And when people leave, they lose skill sets. It's like languages going extinct, right? The last person to speak the language is the last person to speak the language. And the same happens in our industry and others. So I wanted to create a knowledge vault and interview these experts and memorialize their advice so that either young people that are entering this space or of any age new to this space have a resource to hear from the people we were taught from, I was taught from, and my mentors and my inspiration and my go-to in terms of advice, my sages. So that was the original motivation. I just underestimated how many SMEs there are out there and how much there is to talk about. We're still talking. So it's been great.
Yeah, and I've met some pretty cool people from who were featured on Reliability Matters. So I would not have heard of those folks if it were not for your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Me too. I find the most challenging part of producing the podcast is all the research I have to do to at least get smart enough, and I'm smart in air quotes, to know what questions to ask. Because I'm interviewing subject matter experts that are deep down the rabbit hole in subjects I am very unfamiliar with in any amount of detail. So I have to learn in order to ask questions so I can learn more, right? I'm sure you're in the same position. Sometimes you're probably interviewing someone that maybe is more experienced in one aspect of what you do. And you have to do a lot of research just to figure out, to be in the same universe as them, so that's been a challenge. But the other rewarding thing besides educating our industry is I'm a lot smarter. I can be on an airplane and I can have at least a 15-minute conversation on almost any technical subject related to this industry. I can't go more than 15 minutes because that's pretty much all I've retained after all these episodes. But I really am blessed with the ability to just talk to these experts and learn myself. I'm a very curious person, and I love learning. And what better way than to be, digitally face to face with some of the most renowned experts in our industry.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up nicely. It really puts some of those great people right in front of the camera, and gets
Yeah.
access to their knowledge immediately. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in listening to the podcast, follow the link we have in the show notes, and you'll go over to the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe, and you'll be able to see all those episodes as they come out. Shifting gears just a little bit, your book that's coming out soon. It's entitled The Reluctant Entrepreneur. And when we first started talking, you made it sound like you were pretty reluctant to pack up your baseball bat and mitt, as you said, and start your own business. Is the title Reluctant Entrepreneur really reflecting how you feel about yourself and your own journey and through the electronics industry?
In the early days, yeah. I am not one of these people that grew up with the idea that someday I'll run my own company. Someday I'll be my own boss. I'll be an entrepreneur. That never struck me. That was never my goal. I am very creative. I love to design things. I love to. When I was a kid, I used to get into a ton of trouble at home because I had this insatiable curiosity as to how things worked. So to satisfy that curiosity, I would take apart all of my parents' appliances. Nothing was safe. Blenders, clock radios, televisions, all these things. That didn't get me in trouble. What got me in trouble was I didn't have the same passion for putting every single piece back together, right? So they'd come home and they'd see a few screws on top of their television and knew I was at it again. But when I was working for this other company, we were building soldering equipment, basically drag soldering machines for those gray-haired people in our industry that remember that, mainly for through-hole soldering. And the company wasn't doing too well. I'd started working there. It was a startup. I was their number 2 employee. But within a few years, the company started going downhill because we were selling through-hole equipment during the dawn of surface mount, right? So I could see the writing on the wall. The owner of the industry didn't see the writing on the wall. He thought SMT was a phase, and then we would stay with through-hole. But at the same time, there was an environmental treaty, now referred to as the Montreal Protocol, that would ban chlorofluorocarbons or chemicals with CFCs. And it turns out the number 1 and number 2 cleaning solvent for our industry to clean boards after reflow contains CFCs, and they would be banned. So I had an idea that we should build a cleaning machine that doesn't use solvents, water-based, and pitched it to my boss, and he wasn't interested. But I really thought this was a good idea. I couldn't shake the idea. It was just haunting me day and night. So I begged, borrowed, pleaded, and to no avail. So finally, I said to my boss, "I'll fund it. I don't know how. That was a very empty promise, but I'll design the machine on my own time with my own money, 100% my risk, and I'll bring you a completed machine, and you tell me if you're interested." Okay, fine. So I did that, and several months later, brought a working machine, and he liked it. So the deal was I would build it on my own time. I had a friend of mine that I was working with, and sell it to the company. So I was basically selling by day and building by night and weekend. And that didn't last long because the problem was we were selling lots of these boxes. And the other problem was I'm very creative, but I'm not really very good at finishing things, right? That's the problem with conceptual people. We start things, we don't really enjoy finishing things. So we couldn't keep up with production. So I sold the rights to the equipment to my employer just for my out of pocket. I can't say I was a very successful business person because I really didn't make any money in that transaction. But I naively thought that what's good for my employer will be good for me, right? So I was happy. So now they own the equipment. And that's where I first realized I had a very poor um, assessment of my status at the company. I had very big expectations. So I thought we were having a product design meeting where I would, where the company would come up with what products are coming next. You know, what's next year's product and the year after that. So I thought I had some street cred because I saved the company with this new machine. And I thought I would perhaps be carried into that meeting on a chariot and fanned with grape leaves. And, I would come up with my next idea and everyone would high five me. So I came up with the next idea for the next generation of machine. And my boss said, no, I'm not interested. I like this other idea, which I thought was rather lame, but that was the other idea on the table. And at some point, I said to my boss, I think you're making a mistake. And then my boss said one word, which quite literally and metaphorically started my company. I said, you're making a mistake. And the one word, by the way, began with F, had 4 letters. Not that word, Zach. Another word. When I said, I think you're making a mistake, he looked at me quite dismissively and said, fine. And that fine just was like a sucker punch to the stomach, right? It was everything I thought I had achieved was for nothing. And I had zero status and obviously zero credibility. And at that very moment, I just decided, okay, I'm going to do this myself, which is what I should have done in the first place. But you got to go through a journey, right? You got to be a pinball bouncing off all the bumpers before you get to your destination. So, about maybe 6 months to a year later, I resigned and on my way home signed a lease on a building, and that was the beginning. Hence, reluctant entrepreneur.
I really identify with that term reluctant and how you've described your journey to getting into your entrepreneurial mode, I guess, or mindset. Because for me, that lack of status or lack of recognition, I think really pushed me to strike out on my own and give it a shot. And, after enough time, I kind of realized, hey, I can actually do this. For me, it was in a transition from academia to industry, which I was not doing very well at, I will say. So I gained a lot of perspective on, marketing yourself and that kind of thing. But I really identify with your story. So once you made that shift and kind of struck out on your own, did you have any doubts as you kind of worked towards building this company and building these products and these systems? Because I asked that because I had doubts in myself when I was doing it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do when they first strike out, and maybe they're not, it's not turning out immediately as they thought it might. They're not sipping on the margaritas on the beach in Mexico on their laptop,
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I did not have doubt, but that is because for many entrepreneurs, obviously not for all, but for many entrepreneurs, the skills they bring to the table to start the company are, in my case specifically, arrogance, ego, bravado, a very poor assessment of risk, naivety, and passion. That was what was in my toolbox. And the reason 70%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the reason 70% of all new business startups ultimately fail, that's a horrible stat, is because the founders, the entrepreneurs that start them, go in with a certain set of skill sets that are perfect in the moment to start a business, to create something from nothing. But they ultimately cause a business to fail because it's like driving in first gear. You need first gear, high leverage, high torque. You get across the intersection, you go from 0 to 20 in first gear. but you can't go far or fast in first gear. Those were my first gear skills. And I'm thankful for those, because if I had the insight to know that there was only a 30% chance statistically that my business would survive, and if I had some foresight into how little I actually didn't know and how underfunded I actually was, I would never have started the business. And I think that's why it's really difficult for people like yourself from academia to enter entrepreneurship, because you know too much and you are aware of risk reward analysis. You've heard of the SWOT analysis thing before. You've been educated. And in my world, I didn't know what I didn't know, which caused me to struggle for many years, because I had to, I was like blind walking through a maze. I'm just bumping into walls. But I'm grateful for that ignorance and naivety and arrogance and ego, passion. I'm grateful for those, because without it, I wouldn't have started the business. What I'm also grateful for is my realization that most of those skills needed to be checked and put aside, and morphed into more appropriate skills for the moment. So I had to grow, or I had to hire people. I had to acquire the talent for people with skill sets that I either couldn't obtain or didn't want to obtain.
It sounds like you had the mindset of I can do it all myself when you were going into it.
Yes, of course. And A, yes, you're correct. I had that mindset. That's the ego. And B, that was a reality, because when you start a company from virtually nothing, out of your garage, you really can't afford to hire talent, right? Your team is yourself, chief cook and bottle washer. And then once I got to the point where I started to hire people, the two prerequisites for becoming an employee of mine was a willingness to accept what little I was offering to pay, and a pulse. and we hired bodies, and again, that was right in the moment. And then it stale dated very quickly, and then we had to actually shift gears on that. And that was our shifting out of first gear into second, into third and fourth, overdrive, et cetera, as we went through the various business growth cycles. And we had to acquire or learn the appropriate set of skill sets for the stage of business we were in. And we've been in business for 32 years. The stages still keep coming, Zach. It's not like the last 10 years has been exactly the same. I liken business to a video game where you start off with 5 lives, you complete level 1, maybe you're down to 4 lives. Level 2 is a little harder than level 1, new monsters, new trapdoors. Then you're down to 3 lives. And then level 3 comes, and 4 comes, and 5 comes, and eventually you're dead. That's business. And, so there aren't really cheat codes you can just download in business, right? There's no cheating. There's some basic fundamentals that just have to be followed. So I had to discover what those fundamentals were, at least for me, at least for my business. It might be different from some other business. I'm not professing that the way I did it was right. The way I did it was like a roller coaster, man. It was nuts, but it worked for me. And it's been an incredible journey. So what this book talks about, I can't say it's a how-to book. It's kind of a how not to book. Here's what happened to me. Here's the skill sets I had. Here's my personal experience with various stages of business, from pandemics to great recessions, to wars, to terrorist attacks, to lawsuits from competitors, all of that. It was death by 1,000 trials, or at least survival by 1,000 trials. And so it really is the mistakes I made that I thought were right in the moment, and the course correction that the business made and what we've learned, what the takeaways are. That's really the book right there. It's my journey, but more importantly, what I've learned through my journey and what, I call it the business gods metaphorically, what the business gods have taught me, and looking back with perspective and altitude, what I've learned. Would I do anything differently? No, absolutely not, because challenges are and obstacles are important. I would not be where I am today were it not for all the mistakes I made, and and the bravado and the ego and the passion and the arrogance and the naivety. I needed that. They were the perfect ingredients at that part of the recipe.
You mentioned that this is somewhat of a book of how not to. People can learn from your mistakes, let's say.
Yeah.
Given that is one of the takeaways, the question I have here is, I think that folks in the electronics industry can be hyper entrepreneurial. I think our industry is kind of unique. And software is kind of the same way. Engineers like to strike out on their own and try their own things. So what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions about striking out on your own, starting your own business, becoming an entrepreneur, and trying to grow your own business?
I'll read you just one paragraph from the introduction of the book, because I think that sums it up. Here we go. I just need to put my old man glasses on, Zach. Popular memes often humorously depict the difference between what I do and what other people think I do. This is particularly true for entrepreneurs. Many times, friends and family don't truly understand our work, often believing the grass is greener on our side. Entrepreneurs frequently hear how others desire the supposed ease and freedom of owning a business. Yet anyone who has ventured into entrepreneurship knows that being your own boss is a myth. Instead, we answer to banks, vendors, customers, employees, governments, tax collectors, economies, and even the weather. When we struggle, we're seen as failures. If we succeed, it seems too easy. I think that is the common misconception of entrepreneurs, is that we write our own we write our own checks, we take vacations all the time, we sit on the beach in Mexico, sipping the umbrella drink with a laptop and on the phone with our financial advisor, right? And waiting to go to the airport, to the private terminal of the airport, and get on our Falcon jet. Yes, that happens. Yes, people win the lottery. Yes, people put 25 cents in a slot machine and win $10,000. It happens. It doesn't happen often, and it doesn't happen to most people. So I think that's the misconception. It's a what I do, what everyone else thinks I do type of meme in real life. In reality, owning your own business and growing your own business is very similar in many ways in terms of commitment to having a child. It's not an 8-hour-a-day proposition. It's 24/7, 365. It's you sweat and bleed your business, and that could be damaging to relationships. It could be damaging to your whole social structure, to your reputation. It's a commitment. So I think that, and there's absolutely no guarantee of any success. In fact, the odds are greatly stacked against you, 70-30, greatly stacked against you. So it takes a different mindset to become an entrepreneur, meaning that you evaluate risk and reward differently. If you were given an offer to work for a company, a cool company, and you had to make some sacrifices. You had to sell your home and move across the country. You had to move away from all of your friends, because when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have time for friends. You had to give up all these things. And your employer said, but there's only a 30% chance we're going to keep you. And if we don't keep you, you're on your own, right? It's just done. No one would ever take that job for a 30% chance at winning. And when you go to Vegas, the worst odds in Vegas are almost 50-50. If you play the outside of the roulette table, red, black, odd, even, high, low, etc., then you bet $1 for the chance to win $1. Well, can you imagine if you bet $1 for the chance to win 30 cents? That's what we do every time we start a business. And but it doesn't have to be that way. I think there's a commonality. There's a common denominator behind the 70% of businesses that fail and the 30% of businesses that succeed. And if we can get down into the depths of what those common factors, common denominators are between successful and unsuccessful businesses, then we can determine ahead of time whether we have the right ingredients or can obtain or acquire the right ingredients to be in the 30% column rather than the 70% column. And I think I think most of the businesses that fail because the entrepreneurs that started them didn't shift into the next appropriate gear, to use that automotive analogy, at the right time. I think it's predictable, and it's not as dangerous as it seems if one is willing to mold themselves and remold themselves and break the mold and remold themselves again over and over and over again. And always be, it's like surfing, you always be in front of the wave, not behind the wave, not on top of the wave. You got to be in front of it to get that momentum going. And I think most entrepreneurs start off in front of the wave, and then at some point the wave just, consumes them and they're buried. I think that's 70%.
You brought up kind of the romantic image, I guess, of a successful entrepreneur, right? The person who's on their phone with their financial advisor and right before they board their G5 jet and
Right.
jet set off to the next tropical paradise. I think what people don't see is all of that struggle leading up to that point where they finally get to that after 5, 10, 15, 20 years, however long it takes. If someone is considering going their own way in the electronics industry, how can they really assess if they're willing to put in that level of work and tolerate that level of, I guess to say, that level of BS in order to get to that place of success? And the reason I ask that is because I think humans naturally underestimate their level of risk tolerance. So what would you say to the person who is maybe considering that and has that misconception that that's where they're going to be very quickly?
Read the book. Read every business book you can. One of the business books that I really like is by Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. And that opened my eyes and helped me in my journey. I think everyone has a different motivation for wanting to be their own boss, so to speak, which in itself is a myth, as I already described. But everyone has their own motivation. Mine was to produce a product that I wanted to share with the world, right? I was very passionate about the product, and building my own business was an avenue, was a vehicle to accomplish that. I think it really helps to have a passion beyond just being your own boss. I think if that's the passion, you're probably more likely to be in the 70% world than you are in the 30% survival world. I think there needs to be something more, at least for me, and everyone's built differently, so I don't want to assume everyone's the same. But for me, it needed to be more than I want to be my own boss. If you want to be your own boss, be your own boss. You're not going to be successful, without any more depth in plans than that. But that's easy. Just quit your job. I guess a homeless person on the street is technically their own boss, right? They're entrepreneurial, not in a successful way. So I think it's really important to have a dream. One of the things I enjoy doing is I speak at universities on the subject of entrepreneurship, and I share my journey. And every year I go to Dartmouth College and I speak there. And I'm invited to be on a panel. There's an engineering in the Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth. they have an innovations program. So innovations for engineers, which is really interesting. It's an entrepreneurial program for engineers. And part of their curriculum is to create either a real or fictitious company and build a company. And then toward the end of the year, they have to do a fast pitch competition to a mock series of investors. And it's basically American Idol for business, or Shark Tank, I guess would be a better. I like American Idol analogy better because I'm on the panel, and I think I'm kind of the Simon Cowell of the group. Like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I'm a little bit unfiltered because they got to hear it. They got to hear it sometime. Might as well hear it from me because I don't count. But one of the, I'd say, disappointing things, and maybe it's just a sign of the times, is they have to do a multi-year pro forma financial statement. This is where they'll be in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4 or 5. And now everyone's talking about venture capitalists and seed rounds and fundraising, da da da. I never did any of that. And almost all of them, if I ask them, what's your exit strategy? What's your goal? What's the prize? It's to sell the business. It's to do an IPO and then get on their G5 and go to that island and start sipping the margaritas. I mean, that's their goal. And that's just the sign of the times. I think businesses where their goal is financial success are probably in the higher percentile for failure. Financial success is the result of good decisions. It's not the result of chasing money. You chase money, you chase cash flow, you get money, you get cash flow, often unprofitably. We did that. If you chase good decisions, then those other things come. There's no other choice. The universe there's universal law, right? There's Newton's law. There's universal law. It's physics. And if the correct decisions are made at the correct time, success will follow. It has no choice. Let go of an apple from a tree, it will fall. It has no choice. That's gravity. There are, I think, very similar, yet more difficult to define universal truths when it comes to business and life in general, that are maybe less documented and sound a little bit more hocus pocus, kumbaya. But I don't mean that in that context. But I think my advice for anyone that wants to be their own boss is you need more than that. Okay, great. Everyone wants to be their own boss. I want to win the lottery. Fine. Noted. But what do you want to do? How do you want to change the world? What's your passion? And what's the best way to accomplish that passion? Is it to just patent a product and sell it to the world? Is it to build your own business, do it yourself? Is it to pitch it to your employer? You can be entrepreneurial without owning a company, right? Entrepreneurs, not all entrepreneurs own a company. There are people who work in a cubicle in an engineering department that are very entrepreneurial. And but I think it starts with the idea. And the idea is not, I want to own my own business. That's not enough specificity in my mind.
I would 100% agree with all of that. And I like how you brought up the I guess the perception about exit. The outcome is you sell the business, you IPO. Hopefully the investors make something, and at the end of it, you're a multimillionaire and you can just sit back and do nothing the rest of your life. And
right.
I think the reality for the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs, forget about the unsuccessful people for a moment, but the successful entrepreneurs, much, much different.
Look at Richard Branson. Richard Branson's a great example. He owns, I think at last count, more than 100 companies. How many does he actually operate? 0. He knows what he's good at, and he knows what he's not good at. More importantly, he's good at being the brand ambassador. He's crazy. He's kind of the modern day playboy. Every guy wants to be Richard Branson. Cool. et cetera, et cetera. Probably the most politically incorrect CEO on the planet. But he knows that, and he uses it to sell the brand, from Virgin Atlantic Airways to, the old Virgin Records, which didn't make it, Virgin Trains, Virgin Credit Cards, Virgin Phones. I mean, many of the businesses didn't last, and I think it's because he was too involved in it. Now his businesses are rather successful because he builds the business and then hires the talent to run it. He's not in there making decisions, on a day-to-day tactical basis. He's the strategy, he's the conceptual person, but he knows his role, and he knows what lane he needs to be in. And entrepreneurs are the same way. We got to know what our talent is, and more importantly, what it isn't. And if that isn't talent, that missing talent is required, better find it somewhere.
I think those are some great takeaways from your experience and from the book. And so before we run out of time, I want to make sure we get this in. Where can people go and buy this, and when will it be released?
Well, as of today, it's about 2 weeks away from being released. It's in the final edit stage. This is what the book looks like, except right now this says, not for resale sale because it's a proof copy. But it'll be available on Amazon in paperback form, in Kindle form, and then within a few weeks after original publication, it'll be available on Audible as well as a Audible book. And that will happen a few weeks from now. So today's the 21st of August as we're recording this. So whenever you watch or hear this, do the math. So it'll 2 or 3 weeks max.
That's excellent. That's really cool. And it must be really exciting. Not trying to interject or brag, but I've had a couple of discussions with publishers, and I haven't moved on it, but in my mind, I can only imagine the satisfaction and the level of accomplishment that you must feel actually seeing the proof in print and knowing that it's going to be out very soon.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. I didn't write the book. I didn't start writing the book with the intention to publish it. I wrote it because I wanted to document the process, because, I'm 64 years old. There's a lot of minute details I forget, from the early days of the business. And then all of a sudden I'm reminded of it. I'm like, I got to write that down. Right. So I wrote it really as I wrote it for me. It was cathartic.
Cathartic.
Cathartic. Yeah. I don't know why. I'm an author and I can't even speak. It was very personally satisfying for me to write that book. And I just kind of did it for that purpose at first. And then I wrote, put it on a shelf, put it on a shelf, took it off the shelf, reread it and went, oh, this part's great. This part sucks. And, rewrite some stuff. And then eventually I kind of morphed into, well, maybe someone who's thinking of starting a business, or who has a business, who's going through the same struggles I went through, would benefit from this story, not as a lesson plan, but just as, hey, you're not alone, right? If I had known older me, when I was younger, I would love to sit down over a drink and learn, how'd you get through this, right? And so it became something that was personal for me. And then I thought, well, gee, there's a lot of me's out there, right? I'm not special. I'm one of hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs out there, and not all of some I can learn from. And if any can learn from me, if I've learned anything that's valuable, why not share it? So that's kind of the motivation.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I just want to say congratulations. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to write, to write anything, but especially to actually produce a book. So kudos to you. Congratulations. And I hope everyone out there listening will go pick up The Reluctant Entrepreneur when it comes out very soon.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. It's good seeing you again.
Thank you. Good to see you too. And I'm sure we'll talk again very soon. To everyone that's out there listening, we've been talking with Mike Conrad, host of the Reliability Matters podcast and founder and CEO of Aqueous Technologies. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button. You'll be able to keep up with all of our podcast episodes and tutorials as they come out. And last but not least, make sure to pick up the book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, on Amazon. And don't stop learning, stay on track, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.